Hi guys, welcome to our first video lecture. As promised, I'm going to do my darndest to get this done before I go to sleep tonight, so it's going on 3 a.m. Wednesday night. We'll see how this goes. So, this is going to be the first of a series of 3 lectures on settlement, pre-settlement, and post-settlement processes. So, as you'll recall, settlement is when larvae move from the pelagic environment, from the water column, to living on the benthic environment, generally like a reef, in my world since I study coral reefs. So here you can see the larval development through time of the schooling bannerfish here. I think the schooling bannerfish are just one of the coolest fish. Some people think it looks like a Moorish idol, so they say it's a false Moorish idol, but I think it's really cool in and of itself. I'm always excited to see them on the reef. Okay. So in the last 2 lectures we were talking about various mechanisms for maintaining diversity. And the last couple ones we talked about were really dependent on recruitment and settlement and what's happening in the larvae. So it's really important for us to understand what's going on in that larval stage when they're recruiting to the benthic substrate. This is really what makes the marine environment so different from the terrestrial environment. So the 2 hypotheses that really depend on recruitment and the larval system is the lottery hypothesis, the lottery effect, and the recruitment limitation effect. So as you'll recall, we talked on Wednesday about how most likely it's really multiple hypotheses, multiple effects that are causing the maintenance of diversity in any one system. But you can kind of see what's going on with recruitment and competition and predation and get some idea of which one of these effects might be the most important. That's what the pluralistic thing is about, that there's more than one of these hypotheses happening. But again, you can look at what's happening with recruitment, with competition, with predation, and get some idea of which of these models might be the most important. So if there's lots of recruitment, lots of larvae coming in, there's no limitation of recruitment, and there's lots of competition happening, then you're probably going to end up seeing the niche diversification model. If there's lots of recruitment but not much competition, that means something else is controlling the population other than recruitment or competition. So that's when you see the compensatory mortality hypothesis. It's something, whether it's a disturbance or a generalized predator, is causing mortality of the dominant competitor. But if there's not enough recruitment, or if it's just recruitment, not competition, so if both recruitment and competition are important, then you're going to get the lottery hypothesis model, which, remember, is where there's empty spots on the reef, and whatever fish larvae happens to be closest and ready to settle is going to get that spot and hold on to it for life. And then if there's not enough recruitment, then there's not going to be competition, and that's when you get the recruitment limitation model. Okay, so again, what makes the marine environment so cool is that most of the organisms have a really dispersive juvenile stage. So most fishes and invertebrates produce a larvae that spends time in the pelagic zone, in the open ocean, the water column, that then recruits back as juveniles to the benthic zone. And it might be to the same reef, or it might be to different reefs. Reefs just being benthic zone, hard substrate, not necessarily coral reef here. So here's another way of depicting it. Adults that live in the benthic environment reproduce to produce larvae that have to survive, grow, develop, and disperse in the pelagic environment. Then they settle out and become juveniles in the benthic environment, where again they're maturing, growing, and surviving to become adults. So this is what we call a complex bipartite life cycle. Bipartite meaning 2 parts: the benthic marine adult and the pelagic larvae. So I'm going to simplify this into this depiction. This is the one we're going to be using through this series of lectures. So there's the adult living on the benthos. We'll use the schooling bannerfish for this example. It reproduces, and schooling bannerfish are broadcast spawners, which means they release their sperm and eggs out into the water column. The sperm and egg fertilize and form a larvae. Larvae gets bigger, goes through some changes, eventually settles out to the benthos, becomes a juvenile, gets bigger, and then matures, grows, and eventually becomes an adult that can reproduce again. To look at an invertebrate example, barnacles. This is Balano's glandula, which apparently is probably the most common barnacle that we have here in the Monterey Bay. Live on the benthos. By the way, that's how they feed. They kind of have like to me, it looks like a hand that comes out and feeds. So when you look at that, you can see that they're actually crustaceans. They're actually more closely related to crabs than they are to, say, a mollusk, like a mussel or a limpet or snail, even though they kind of look like them. Okay, so one of the interesting things about these barnacles is the way they reproduce. They actually do internal fertilization. So they have this penis that's 6 times the size of their body. So that penis reaches over to the nearest barnacle and does internal fertilization. And then the barnacle that has the eggs that has been fertilized releases larvae out into the water column. And the first several stages of the barnacles are called nuclei. So they actually go through about 8 different stages here, but we're only going to show 2. And then the last stage is called the cypress. But don't worry about these terms, the nucleus and the cypress. It's just FYI, to see an example here. And then the cypress settles out to the benthos, becomes a juvenile, and then an adult barnacle that's able to reproduce again. Okay, so during this whole life cycle of the plankton and the benthos, there's a lot of different processes that organisms have to go through in order to survive and become an adult. So if we start at settlement, when the larvae is settling out to the benthos, then as soon as they settle, they have to completely change what they look like to go from what a larvae looks like to what a juvenile looks like, which is called metamorphosis. And then they have to deal with whatever processes are happening that might cause early settlement mortality. And we'll talk more about what those processes are. And then they develop as a juvenile. And as they're juveniles and adults, they're dealing with all the things we've been talking about: predation, competition, mutualism, physiological stress. They become sexually mature, they produce gametes, and either they do internal fertilization on the benthos, or they release their gametes out into the water column and have external fertilization. If they have internal fertilization, then they're releasing larvae. If they have external fertilization, then they're releasing gametes that are being fertilized in the water column. Then often the larvae get swept out to the open ocean and have an emigration, exit. And while they're out in the open ocean, they have to deal with oceanographic transport, things like currents carrying them around. They have to deal with getting eaten by pelagic predators, by fishes, all kinds of organisms. They have to deal with not being able to get enough food and often starving. And they have to deal with, physiological stresses. Maybe it's too hot, maybe it's too cold, maybe it's too high salinity, all kinds of different physiological stresses. And while they're in this larval stage, there are sub-stages. They're morphing from, a lot of the larvae go through maybe like 6 different stages like the barnacle did, and like the example of the long-tailed bannerfish did. And they have to immigrate with I for in back to the reef, find the right habitat, settle, and then go through the whole cycle again. But there's a lot of different processes going on here, and we're really going to focus on the reproduction to early settlement mortality. Now, we've talked already about the juvenile and adult stages. So I'm going to divide this into a couple of main stages. So first of all, we're going to talk about reproduction, which is from producing the gametes until external fertilization or release of the larvae. We're going to talk about the planktonic larval stage, which includes emigration, larval metamorphosis, and immigration back to the reef. settlement, which includes habitat selection, settlement, and post-larval metamorphosis. Post-settlement processes. And here we're really talking about looking right after settlement. So early post-settlement stuff. And then, of course, there's the adult life, which we've already talked about, so we're not going to spend too much time on that. Okay, so first we're going to start off talking about reproduction. So let's start a new video.